Welcome back.
Yay!
It feels like it's been a minute for us.
It has. Or it does feel like that because it has.
It has been a minute. And in terms of the way we upload the episodes, they're still uploading in the right order. But
Yeah.
Danica was gone for an entire week with
Yeah.
the kiddos to Texas
Yes.
and left me behind.
We visited our in-laws. It's a 10-hour drive. 3 kids, 6 and under. Quite the adventure.
Yeah. But I feel like for what it's worth, it probably went about as well as it could have.
It did, yes. When was that? Yesterday on our drive home. The kids and I went our last stretch, 5 hours.
0 stops.
0 stops.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Kids watched some shows, napped, woke up, gave them Goldfish and another movie, and we made it on home.
Speaking of which, so the movie the kids were watching was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yes.
And my sister actually texted me about that movie today.
Oh, okay.
Because the neighbor dad, Selinsky,
Yes.
he is 35 when they filmed that, which is my age right now.
Oh.
But I've always viewed him as like a 50-year-old as long as I've known that show. And I'm as old as that guy, the cranky neighbor.
Yeah.
So there's a little Disney trivia for those of you listening out there who are very curious. But, yeah, Danica and the kids made it back yesterday. Brought me this NASA hat because they visited NASA while they were
Yeah, we
went
did
to Houston.
all the homeschool things.
Yeah.
We went to see alligators, the big thicket, NASA, the Museum of Natural History, and a health museum. Yeah, we did a lot. Ate a lot of
fun.
gumbo.
A lot of gumbo.
Ate a lot of Bluebell.
And
I was
here
not the
by
only
myself.
one who ate a half gallon, but I did buy it and I did finish
You
it.
ate a whole half gallon by yourself?
No, I'm saying I do not think that I did.
That probably could tie us into this episode. What's the topic of this episode?
Well, first, let me give you the mission statement.
Okay, that works.
Can I do that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Biblically centered equips your family with knowledge and conversations for you to live and defend your Christian faith. And so we're in our second category, which is the category of choices. And we are on virtue number 7 out of 24. And that states, or that says, we practice self-control with our words and actions and when faced with temptation. So I had self-control.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a few scoops. There were other people helping me.
What
but
flavor?
I was just banana pudding.
Is that the only flavor you had while you were there?
Yeah. No. One night I had a milkshake.
McCoy milkshake?
A McCoy milkshake.
With Oreo and vanilla bean?
Yep.
That was whenever I started. Yeah, that's for a long story. Started dating Danica. That was the McCoy milkshake. They would literally get crushed up Oreos in a cup with milk and vanilla bean ice cream, and then you would eat it with a fork.
Yep. I did eat mine with a fork.
Yeah, and that's just kind of. And I still, like, if I ever do something like that these days, I do the same thing with a fork.
Shout out to my sister-in-law who said that I made them better than my brother. I know. He was a little upset about that.
Well, the kid said your brother makes better waffles than me, so
Well.
it's probably all cyclical. I feel like they were just being polite, though. There's no way that's true. So let us continue.
Okay, so yes, so today we're talking about self-control, and so you know how we love our definitions. So today I'm just going to read kind of a little bit about self-control. So to start, I'm defining restrain because that's a part of self-control. So restrain means to hold back, and it says the commands of God should be effectual restraints upon our evil passions. And then also I wanted to bring up, and so that we could discuss self-control and self-discipline, because they're actually different, but they do go together. So even though our virtue says self-control, I feel like that's a little bit easier to communicate to children and kiddos, but self-discipline also falls into this category as well, or this virtue. So self-control, as I just read, is restraint or holding back or suppression. So it is an intentional curbing of ungodly desires. And then self-discipline, to kind of counteract, or not counteract that, but to go with that, is intentional, purposeful managing and determining of what to say or do. So it kindles holy desires. So self-control is more about just control, restraining, and self-discipline is more about being purposeful and kind of kindling the right desires.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of crossover there because, like, if you view it like a Venn diagram, you know, you have self-control in one circle, self-discipline in the other circle. I feel like there would be a big middle section there because there's a lot of, self-discipline that requires self-control or produces self-control, and then obviously self-control that produces a lot of self-discipline. So they definitely go hand in hand, even though they kind of from the out of the gate have two different initial purposes.
So it's working together, because if you were only focused on self-control, yes, you would be curbing things, but maybe you wouldn't be, that would just be one part of it. And if you just focused on self-discipline, that again is just one part. So it's the inner working. So you can't just curb ungodly desires and not try to pursue anything.
Right. It's almost like instead of just stopping ungodly desires, it's almost like you're replacing them with godly desires.
Yes. You also have to cultivate godly desires. But then if you only cultivate those good things, and if you're not abstaining from other things, you're kind of hindering your growth. Yeah. So, 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way to escape, that you may be able to endure it. And so in thinking through this virtue, I kind of wrote it, I had kind of stopped at the just self-control with our words and actions. And then when I kept kind of going back and back over it, anyways, I just felt like I needed to add, and when faced with temptation, to just show like, and to teach kids that temptation in and of itself, like, isn't wrong. I think everyone is tempted, but it's what you do with that and through that. So are you going to allow temptation in, or are you going to be able to produce the self-control to abstain from those?
And that's an important distinction from what a lot of what you potentially could hear in the world of, because temptation is a feeling. It's something you feel.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be a lot of confusion in the world about, like, if you feel it, that makes it true or true to you.
Right.
But we want to teach our kids that that's not always the case.
Right. Yeah.
And that there are things that are clearly defined in Scripture that we all feel or can potentially have the way to feel these things, but that doesn't mean that that's something we need to act on or pursue or
yeah, I mean, and that could be towards a variety of things. So you can feel like you need to be or be angry towards someone, or you can feel like you should be resentful, or feel that you should, X, Y, Z, all these things that can apply to emotions and obviously like circumstances and everything else. But those feelings obviously always need to go back to the truth and to what is in God's word. So what does God say about those things? That's how we should actually respond. Yeah.
Yeah. And our feelings we can make them a good servant, but a terrible master.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. That's good. And so when we are able to pursue this virtue of self-control, of self-discipline, it actually ends up making us God-dependent instead of other-dependent. And kind of to explain that more. So self-control lends itself to every area of our life, as in you need self-control in every single area to live a good life, to be able to pursue the things of God. And when you're pursuing those things, then you're fully dependent on God instead of yourself, because you can only, So when you're operating in self-control, you're placing your dependency on God to help you with those things. Because if you don't ask God for help when you need self-control, and if you just stop at like, well, I can do it, or no, I've got it, then you're depending on your own ability. So we always want to make sure we're always pointing back to God and to Christ of, he is, our strength when we are weak. He is able to help us through those things. And I think just the beauty of being almost showing our kids how to be transparent with God. I think maybe a lot of times we come forward thinking, I think it's natural to want to hide those things to people like to our friends, to our family, and then, to God too. We try to like make ourselves look one way or paint a picture of ourselves in one way, when what we want to kind of do to our children is to say, no, like there is good in being transparent with the things that you need self-control in, or the things that you are tempted in, because you can't get help, or you can't be helped by friends, family, or God unless you are allowing them.
Yeah, you have to be open and honest with yourself, and because everyone has their own maybe things that they're inclined to feel or to be tempted by.
Yeah.
But then to set up kind of those triggers, or not triggers, but the markers that a certain feeling is usually what leads you down.
Yeah.
And then also I think it's important to have kind of that big picture of the why behind the discipline,
for sure,
or the self-control. Because obviously you have to have a why that you believe in.
Yeah. I was also reading a little bit about self-control and self-discipline in preparation for this, but they were kind of talking about like if you think about it in a battle, if you give in right away, then you don't know how to resist, or you don't build up the tenacity to be able to go further or to do more. So if you think of it as like a battle and you just like cave at the first battle, then you're more likely to cave in the future. Whereas if you're able to kind of build up your self-discipline, your self-control, then you're able to more easily observe what the enemy is doing, what he's trying to come against you with. And each battle that you're able to withstand or overcome, you're preparing yourself in the long run to win the ultimate war, per se. So if you think about each of these things as a battle, which sometimes they really are, with either your flesh or your mind, or any of that. They're all battles that we're doing. And if you can withstand one more, then it kind of is able to help you like build up or prepare.
It's like a muscle.
Yes.
And obviously, to make an easy comparison with physical activity or working out, like you're not going to get stronger if you don't start small.
Right. Yes. And then if you also go and yes. So if you just go and you're like, I'm going to lift 250 pounds, and you do it, and you're like, ugh, I can't do that. And then you just walk away, where it's like, well, yeah, you're not going to be able to
But in order to know how to get to 250 pounds, you have to know how to do 75 pounds.
Yes.
And then you build up to that, and then you can continue to progress, and then your body knows how to respond.
Yes. And
you're not going to blow out a muscle.
Oh my goodness, yes. And then it also just makes you aware. I think that's half of this, is just to be aware of like, what is the enemy going to try to present to me? What is he trying to tempt me to do? What areas do I feel like I am weak or prone to sin? And to recognize that, and to help our kids see that.
Yeah, it's important in marriage. It's important raising kids, because we know that the enemy doesn't want healthy Christian marriages or healthy Christian kids. So it's important for us to be disciplined in the right things, to make our marriage and make our parenting and our kids a godly unit.
Yeah.
Was that your tummy?
Yeah.
Are you hungry?
No. No.
Just like growling.
We had grilled cheese, and I think it was a lot of cheese and bread. Sorry, guys.
Well, I don't know if they
TMI.
heard it. Just
Oh, well, you called me out.
sorry.
It was just my stomach. Okay, guys. Good grief. Anyways, we're just being real, okay? We are real people.
Ew.
Stop.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, so I think we also mentioned maybe in our wisdom episode, but that self-control can also be used for things that are good for us. So I think we mentioned it kind of in a wisdom context, but I wanted to bring it up again,
Mm-hmm.
that too much of a good thing can also be a bad thing. So just having that in mind, like what is best?
Mm-hmm.
You know, not what is good immediate right now, but what is best, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So just good to know. And then also, how does self-control apply to things other than actions? So thoughts, attitudes, etc. The more you're able to kind of realize that self-control, I think a lot of times maybe we default to like, oh, you can't control yourself. And it's, you know, an action, or, you know, I'm thinking, you know, of our boy, like hitting or being aggressive, you know, like
Yeah.
those kind of things. But it's really like, no, I even need self-control in my attitudes, how I'm going to respond to people. I
Mhm.
need self-control in my thoughts, what I'm
Well, yeah, the
thinking
verse
about
about
people.
taking every thought captive.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that's a discipline in and of itself. That's not something we just do.
Yeah.
You have to practice that to get good at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And so our problem isn't always that we do the wrong thing, is that we don't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, just another aspect. A lot of times we just default to do the wrong thing, whereas we need to try to default to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the point above about like that, it's not just about killing sin or
Right.
removing sin, which is obviously important, but that our goal for us and for our kids is that we're cultivating, you know, the fruits of righteousness.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this I really feel like is just about gaining a deeper perspective on the why behind
Yeah.
self-control, and that ultimately it does lead us to produce the right things. So in
Mhm.
Philippians 1:6 it says, "I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ."
Yeah.
So yeah, so what do we want ruling over us?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the question, you know, to always have in front of us, to have in front of our kids, you know, like who is ruling you right now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it you? Is it, you know, is it lies of the enemy trying to come in, or are you allowing God to
Mm-hmm.
rule your life or your decisions?
Yeah.
You know, I think nowadays it's so easy to just get caught up in your world, you know, like everyone's in their own little you bubble. And so to remember, like, I shouldn't be ruling myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would put my life into chaos and disorder, you know, like if we are allowed to be rule ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. So that's very important. And I also, in that verse you just read, he will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So it is a ongoing work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with a lot of these, we've said like, this isn't just like, yay, you got it, gold star, you get to check that box off. But it's like, no, this is going to be, you know, a daily,
Mm-hmm.
hourly, minute, you know, almost thing that just to keep in mind, keep in front of you of. And I think it can always go back to our first virtue. We revere the one true and living God and pursue holiness with our entire being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does that pursuit of holiness look like? That is going to flow into having self-control.
Yeah.
You know, because I want to make sure that my life and the fruit of my life is holy to show God's holiness. So yeah, but ultimately, I mean, we know that won't be completed until Jesus comes again.
Right.
And it can't be done until then. But to know in our lives we're dependent on him and pursuing him. Yeah, and again, just some of these virtues I know with choices are a little hard of like, how do I show this to my kids? And I just keep going back to almost if you feel like you have to narrate your life almost to an extent of just like, oh, I felt like I was going to do that, but I had self-control and I did this. Or, I think they'll see that. And I think they'll see that in your attitude, or if you start to get one way and then you're like, nope, I'm going to have self-control.
That's also a good reason to have a spouse.
Yes. Like, oh, I am going to have self-control
babe
on that right now. So any way you're able to, again, not narrate, but any way that you're able to just keep that in mind of like, my kids need to see why I'm making these choices or that I made a choice. They might not see that, but I'm going to choose self-control today. And as we talked before, it's not self-control in just food. I think that's maybe a default one of like, no, I'm going to have self-control from desserts today or something, but really try to make it more than that,
Yeah. And there's practical things, for us as adults that we can do. I think it's important for us to also have a retroactive perspective on, and not to, obviously I don't want to get into thinking that this is all performance based, but I think it's important to understand that we need to have a good track record and this is kind of off the cuff, so sorry, but a good track record as parents or just people in general of how we feel we are doing in our life. And so this past week I instituted this thing on my Google Drive where it's basically like a spreadsheet, and I can't remember all the categories, but it has like spiritual, family, health, exercise, nutrition. It has 5 or 6 categories on there. And then it's at the end of the day of just ranking how I felt like I did in those areas for that day. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, like where did I feel like I was spiritually today on a scale of 1 to 10? And then obviously, I have the data in there to where it does averages on these things, so you can kind of literally kind of see and have an actual, instead of just ending the day and going to bed, you actually can pause for a minute and think about the day. And I feel like that's a healthy practice just to be in as adults, so you can continually look back, and then hopefully over time kind of see those numbers and the perspective that you have on how you did in that day continue to tick up. So that's a freebie because there's obviously, I don't know, there's aspects of how do you get your kids to understand that, but yeah.
I like that.
I think it's also important for kids, I know it is important to understand that like we submit to God and his authority.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that is knowing that our kids are young and their brains aren't fully developed. But whenever they're having these, emotional experiences, these, where obviously you can tell that they're irrationally responding to emotion, it's still communicating to them the point that, like, I understand that you're feeling certain things, but you're in charge of your actions.
Yes.
Like, you are in control of your actions. And I get it that they're, young and their brains aren't fully developed to fully understand what that means.
Yeah.
But still instilling that into them now. And again, like, just so that it's in there. So as they do age and gain more understanding that's there, that they, like, we can feel what we feel and we know that happens, but our actions, we control those.
Well, and those little things, what you were just saying, we do say that a lot. You are in charge of you. Like, you are in charge of your actions. You are in charge of your attitude. But those things I forget. I know I've read it in several things, but just those little sort of like quips that parents say all the time, it's almost like those are kind of the things that your kids will remember the most, because that's your default go-to of, little saying or something. Like, that's what they're actually remembering because you've probably said it so many times. I'm sure everyone can think of random things.
Thankfully, I had a dad who said lots of weird things. So I catch myself saying Yumbalina because my dad says that all the time. But it's in there.
There you go. So and that was also kind of the reason from on phrasing these virtues, kind of how we did, is to really make them those small sort of like, oh, self-control, and then you can kind of quip that out per se, because you really want these to stick to them. And when they are going through something and are like, oh, I think I'm being tempted, and then they can just default, they'll already have that in there. So yeah, but that one of you are in control of your actions, or you are in control of your attitudes. I mean, those little things that you repeat over and over, like you said, they're not really maybe comprehending that right now, but they're thinking about it because they know, like, okay, yeah, I'm the one with the attitude. Obviously you don't. Obviously you're telling me that I have to change, like they are getting that, even if maybe it doesn't seem like they are in the middle of the craziness.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control."
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's just a powerful verse.
Yeah.
That God literally has given us
Yeah.
a spirit of these things in us. And so like we have power, we have love, and we have self-control because God gave us the ability to have those things.
Yeah.
So it isn't something that's just like this humanistic, manufactured, grind, and then you'll get there. But that God truly has given us the skills in us. Yeah, we have to sharpen them.
Yeah.
But he's the one who's planted those things in us. And ultimately, the things that God gives to us, the purpose of them is to point our lives back to him,
Yeah.
and then to point others to him as well. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what all of this is about.
Yeah.
Is that we could live a life that glorifies God and that we can lead others to Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I feel like without those things, all of this, all the teaching, all this stuff with our kids is kind of just,
Yeah. Well, and I think self-control is one of those things, it's unusual to people, in this day and age. And I think that's also important of we are different, and that's a good thing. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be showing God through our attitudes, through our actions, and resisting temptation, and to teach our kids that of just, yeah, we are different, and that's great. We're honoring that God made us. He says that he created us to be a masterpiece. And so just to be able to display to the world God, not ourselves, but we're supposed to be showing Christ through everything we do. And a big way we can do that is in self-control.
Yeah.
In today, for sure. So
I feel like that's a pretty good spot to wrap up.
I think so. Episode 11.
Yeah, I made it to 11.
Woohoo.
So again, just wrap up. Big thank you to everyone who's listened thus far. We continue to get feedback and comments. So thank you for all those people who do that, and for those who listen, especially the ones who have listened all the way through.
Yeah.
But again, like I've said every episode, if you are just joining us for this one, we encourage you to go back.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff kind of builds upon itself. And we do have some exciting things coming out in the next few weeks. We got our Bible plan out on the Bible app.
Yes.
I know we've talked about that for the few episodes, called
View popular
culture through a biblical lens.
Yes, got it.
In bright yellow. I'll show it again. But it's a great plan. It's 4 days, but it's just a great tool. So
yeah.
But really exciting things coming out later this month, or maybe not this month, but in the next month.
In the next span of a month,
right.
Yes.
Because
we're in a weird February.
I just can't believe this month is already thinking about the last day of January.
Yep.
To now does not feel like a month has passed.
Yeah, well, February.
I know February's short by 3 days, but still.
Yeah, still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
So yes, exciting things, because we are putting the finishing touches on these 24 biblical family virtues, and we're creating a community around that so that you can find like-minded people who also want to raise their kids with biblically centered virtues.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And it's good. It's good stuff.
I showed it to Johnny today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I showed you all the like graphics and stuff. You had already seen it, you know. Anyways, it looks sharp in the format that we've put it in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
That's all for me.
Bye.
Bye.